When you're in conflict with someone else or even yourself or a group of people, you might just see red. But did you know that there are actually 7 layers of conflict? And I found that once I understood these, my reaction or my repression of my shadow really became elevated. It became more nuanced. And when you can add detail and moments of understanding of where something is coming from, it's a complete game changer in terms of shadow work and living life more fully without getting too triggered by this or that. Because I feel like that's what we really want, right? To have more feelings of peace, fun, and success without all the BS. So today I'm going to go through the 7 layers of conflict. These were originally coined by Jennifer Russell and Brian Franklin, I believe. And I'm going to do this in a few parts because there is a lot of information here. Now, before we dive in, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Jessica Depatie, and I'm a shadow work educator and a podcaster, and now I'm on YouTube. And on this channel, we're going to be exploring each very specific shadow state and how to transmute them with shadow work in a way that's really fun and adventurous. I do have a lot of Scorpio in me, so I love me some dark moments. But I feel like when it comes to self-development, shadow work in particular, I want it to be fun. And I want it to be play rather than work. So if you're a fan of my show, the Shadow Work Library podcast, this episode might sound a little familiar to you because I'm going back into my archives of the shows that I've done in audio only, and I'm redoing them for this video version to hopefully elevate the experience. We'll see what the analytics say, but so far it's feeling good. So if you have any questions about what I talk about today, feel free to drop me a comment and I will respond as soon as possible. And if you have Instagram, you can find me at Jessica Depatie _. That's DEPATIE _. And I guess the last YouTube-y thing to say would be, if you're liking the shadow work process, you can go ahead and subscribe. All right, let's get into it. So today we're talking about conflict. Conflict tends to break out whenever 2 or more people agree to identify with their emotional state. So we're not really talking about conflict with yourself necessarily. Maybe this could work, but this is really more for being in conflict with one other person at least. So it can be interpreted through relationships or collectively even through communities, because you know that there is no shortage of conflict between communities and groups. Now, if we break down the Latin origin of the word and have this etymology moment, con means together and flict is from the Latin word fligere. I did actually take 2 years of Latin in high school, even though it didn't sound like it, because I thought I was going to be a doctor. Whoops. Anyway, flict means to beat or to strike. So conflict means to strike or fight together. And I'm sure you don't need a Latin etymology moment to know that conflict does often feel like you are striking each other with words or even literally sometimes, but it's nice to get down to those origins. You can see conflict popping up in so many different situations. It can be as innocent as your partner misplacing your keys or a neighbor complaining about music too loud. Standard stuff, right? And often when you find yourself on the other side of conflict, whether it's been resolved or just dampened due to a lack of attention, you might wonder, why in the world has that little, almost meaningless issue got you so pissed off or so hurt? Well, identifying with your emotional state has different levels of density to them. And if I wanted to say that a different way, how you identify with your emotional state can be ranked on this scale of consciousness. And that's not to say that if you're a highly conscious goddess of a human, this super aware human, you don't experience lower levels of conflict. That's just human stuff. But it does make it easier to identify when you're doing that so you can choose to pull yourself out if you want. Okay, so let's get into these layers. The 7 layers of conflict were, I think I'd mentioned this before, coined by Jennifer Russell and Brian Franklin. They put together research from other amazing sources to package up a level up of our awareness around relationships. Now, I'm not sure if they're still running this program, but I took their retreat twice actually on the same topic, and it was just so good. In general, they do some really kick-ass stuff. So I haven't heard from them in a while, but if you want to Google Jennifer Russell and Brian Franklin, there's some archived older YouTube stuff that you can find, and they're excellent. So all of the conflict that you will feel in your lifetime will touch on these 7 layers all at once, really. But identifying them at the layer level, you can see how all the facets of your conflict, you can see how you can get down to that root problem and then turn that lump of coal into diamond. Because if this show stands for anything, it's that there's so many gifts found in our lower vibing states. We can learn so much from ourselves. We can learn so much about a relationship by really honoring those moments. So to find that lesson and to heal that part of us so that we can transcend the conflict patterns, I mean, that's really what this next couple of episodes is going to be about. So as you make your way through the layers of conflict, you're actually going to be going from a predominantly like past-oriented experience or set of experiences to present and then eventually future-oriented consciousness. And for the sake of time and digestibility on this submission, I'm just going to take us through the first two past-oriented layers of conflict, and then we'll cover the rest in the next one. Now, when I say that these layers of conflict that we're going to go through today are past-oriented, I mean that the situation that's happening to you in the present moment is bringing to the surface parts of you that you've long forgotten. At the first level, this conflict pattern is like orients way before you were even born, and it's completely invisible to your normal state. I think that's why people do plant medicines. Let me back up. I know that's why a lot of people do plant medicines. It's to go back in time and see an experience from a zoomed out perspective. I did an episode here on YouTube also called I Met a Shaman and Found My Purpose. That's a really good one to understand more about what I'm talking about there. But yeah, we're talking about past experiences that still have this iron grip on our reality, even experiences that we didn't experience in this lifetime. This can be generational wounding. This can be ancestral stuff. This can be past life stuff. Kind of doesn't matter what you subscribe to or believe in. We do know from the current science, at least, that generational wounding is absolutely a thing. Absolutely. Things are passed on through our DNA, for sure. But I mean, I like all the other stuff too. I absolutely subscribe to past lives and stuff like that. And as we go through the layers, they become more recent and personal to you. So more current to the present moment, but they're still based on your past and inhibit you from living today as your best self in your current situation. And as we move more into the future-oriented layers of conflict, you can get out of that muck and start assessing your wiser self to see that gift that I was talking about, that gift that's hidden in that conflict, and begin to rewrite your neural pathways. If this is also a little confusing, I promise it's going to make more sense as I get into each one. All right, so here are the 7 layers. Layer 1 is the most past-oriented. I kind of touched on this before, and we really want to strive to be less and less influenced by this. Layer 7, on the other end, would be your wisest layer of conflict management. Again, there's nothing wrong with finding yourself in layer 1. This is human stuff, right? This is an amoral situation. It just takes a bit more deep diving to understand the nature of it, and it can be more of a dense and heavy place to operate out of. So the first one is way back in the past, pain in the collective consciousness. 2, second layer is universal polarities and energy patterns. 3 is personal historical pain. The 4th layer is power, control, and projection. 5 is unexpressed needs and unmet expectations. 6, present perfection and future version. Present perfection and future version. And 7 is Dharmic themes. Okay, again, thank you to Jennifer Russell and Brian Franklin for putting all this together for us. I was taught this by them in 2016 when I was at their Evolving Love workshop, which again was so good. All right, so let's dive into that first layer. Pain in the collective consciousness having to do with the ancient past. Now, if you hear phrases like collective consciousness and start to tune out, I don't blame you. There are quite a few words that people will throw around without really even knowing how to use them. And I think that collective consciousness is one of these good examples. It, kind of like drains the power out of the word, unfortunately. So I want to go about defining that before I move on. Collective consciousness is this sociological concept. It's a fundamental sociological concept that refers to the set of shared beliefs, a set of shared ideals, values, attributes, attitudes, and shared knowledge that are common to a group or society, a social group or society. So this collective consciousness informs our sense of being. It informs our sense of belonging and being in that belonging. It informs our sense of identity and our behavior. And this concept was coined by Emil Durkheim, a sociologist and philosopher who was born in the 1800s. So yeah, not a new concept, just really brought to the surface kind of recently. And these shared beliefs, ideas, and these moral attitudes, they're passed down from generation to generation, both through story and biologically in our DNA. So I was talking a little bit about like science, right? Let me just start off by saying I am a journalist by trade, I guess. I mean, you could say my education was in journalism. I went to Cal State Long Beach. Woo. I wanted to say go whatever our mascot was. I don't even know. 49ers. Oh my God. The worst alumni ever. Anyway, Long Beach was a great school. Just whatever, sports. So with my background in journalism, I collect information. I rarely create any of my new stuff, but I'm really good at putting things together. So when I speak to this science, I'm going to attempt to put any references in the description so you can see them for yourself. But honestly, like, I kind of don't care about that stuff anymore. I just go down these deep rabbit holes, and it's just straight up sometimes I forget to save my sources. So I'm going to try to do that, but just hang in there with me, okay? Now, the study that I'm talking about hint at this possibility, specifically looking at how the environment we live in can make genetic changes. And it's not that far of a stretch to say that the Earth's surface affects culture. So there are even scientists who study this phenomenon known as cultural geography. So in 2017, researchers at the European Molecular Biology Organization in Spain, they did this study with nematodes. The nematodes in this study were genetically modified to carry what's called a transgene for a fluorescent protein. And a transgene in this case is a gene that's been transferred using genetic engineering techniques. And when this protein is activated, the worms will glow under an ultraviolet light. So they wanted to see if these nematodes would capture a change in their environment and then pass those changes in their transgene to their offspring. So they first kept these nematodes at this cooler temperature, and then they noted that the worms hardly glowed at all. Then they moved the worms to a warmer temperature, and they glowed much brighter. Then they soon moved the worms back to that cooler temperature, where they noted surprisingly that they continued to glow brightly, suggesting that they were retaining this memory of the environment, this environmental memory of this warmer climate that affected that transgene. It was still highly active. So then they tracked the glow of those, worms that went on a warm vacation for 14 generations. 14 generations after that had never experienced warmer temperatures, and they found that the baby worms inherited this epigenetic change through both eggs and sperm. So yeah, I'll post that in the show notes. I do have that one. So yeah, we're talking about worms here. And yes, I understand that it is a bit of a stretch to say that, an ancient worm vacation in the tropics proves that we carry some biological trace of our ancestors. But I do strongly believe that we can't wait for science to prove something before we contemplate its validity. Carl Jung once said, "The imagination will often carry us to worlds that never were, but without it, we go nowhere." I love that. I really do live by that. So yeah, I might believe a lot of things that are just completely wackadoodle, but they take me to some cool places. And I think that it requires people like you and me who will have some cojones to go outside of the box once in a while and plant our flag there, even if, it doesn't make sense. So how it happens aside, let's talk about the issues that can be transferred from generation to generation, and then the complications that come up with that. So let's imagine you have a great-great-grandmother, and she was horribly traumatized when she was a teenage girl. Now, this is actually a true story. This woman that I'm thinking of, was gang raped in her hometown of Belize by a group of men. After surviving the ordeal, she naturally wants to protect herself from this ever happening again, so she decides to consciously be more in her masculine. She wants to exercise more power, more confidence, and do away with anything that could be perceived as weak, anything that could have contributed to that situation happening. That may have been dressing very feminine, being friendly and trusting to men, going anywhere alone, dancing, flirting, drawing attention to herself from the opposite sex. So this is a legitimate decision on her part. It's a strategy that she developed to give her a perceived sense of safety and control in her life moving forward. And who knows, this may have protected her moving forward. So she does finally end up meeting a man, and they have a daughter together. And then she teaches her daughter, all of the lessons to keep her safe. So she keeps her daughter from expressing her femininity. She suppresses her sexuality. She instills kind of this sense of fear of unknown people, and her daughter, who has no personal experience with the rape of her mom, gets all of this wounding. And she passes those lessons on to her children, either by actively teaching them these lessons or just passively as they observe how the main woman in their life is operating as a woman. They either mimic it or they use it as a baseline to see how a woman should be. It's mom. We learn a lot from them. And then the cycle goes on, and the culture is now, that lineage is now developing a repression of self-expression and feminine energy. So they don't dance and sing, they're safe and overly conservative with what they experience and who they engage with. And you can see how multiple generations later, it can get really confusing as to why you have a hard time wearing a bikini at the beach, even though you really want to. Or you might want to be more flirty and fun, but you feel this shame or guilt around being that open. So this is like a great example of this first level of collective consciousness that's at play. In this case, it's ancestral wounding that's never been resolved. And that's why shadow work is so, so important. Why it means so much to me. What we do today will be passed down for generations to come. We're all just worms with, earrings and hair. So you've heard that common saying, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Well, that also goes for inaction. If you have a deep wounding pattern that you can't put your finger on, it might not be yours, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't still bring it to the light, because your kids or the kids that you're around may get this pattern from you, and that cycle will continue. So how do you know if the layer you're experiencing has this heavy first layer vibes? Well, this is the most tricky and esoteric, at least at the moment, conflict layer to deal with. But you do need to have awareness around your level of reaction and sense if it's coming from this consciousness of a victim group. I'll give you an example. I used to give massive first level vibes when I would be in this situation. And perhaps any other woman listening can relate to this. But let's say my partner and I are out and we're talking to a man, someone we didn't know. And let's say we're like buying a refrigerator or something. And the man is a salesperson, and this person will only address my male partner, right? I'd ask him a question. I'd ask the salesperson a question, and he'd answer talking to my partner, right? I'm like, hello, I'm right here. I know that I'm half Korean, but I speak English. I would just get so pissed. Like, not just for myself. Something would bubble up inside of me. Like, on behalf of all women, can you speak to me, right? Not just for myself. And I know that this conflict is collective, because the reality is I don't really care if some random person addresses me or not. That doesn't matter logically. But it would make me so angry in the situation that would continue to piss me off long after the situation was over, like later that day. And in my mind, it would always get so big, right? Like, on behalf of all women, screw you. And I have nothing against men. I have a particular business that works solely with men. But at the time, I was answering from a place of all women in my lineage and all oppressed women in the world, and from this distant memory of things being really bad for us, and nothing in my lifetime, really. But it still had this iron grip on me. And I won't say that the oppression of women is something that I've completely detached from, but through alternative healing modalities like plant medicines, I learned where that came from. And I also learned to acknowledge it for what it is and not attach myself emotionally to that deep-rooted stuff. Now, you can release some of these ancient patterns with alternative therapies like plant medicines. You can see a generational healing therapist or even do a guided meditation. There is a hypnosis meditation that I like by Joe Tracy, which I'm going to link to the show notes. And it'll have you imagining different scenarios that may or may not have happened in your lineage or past life. And I always want to caveat that I don't know if any of that stuff is really real. Like, when you're going through a guided meditation, let me back up. I know a lot of it is really real, but when you're going through a guided meditation, you just have to have some discernment around what you envision and visualize, because our interpretation of it can be incorrect. So perhaps not seeing things literally, but more from a principle type of standpoint when you're going specifically through a guided meditation on your own and you're not being facilitated, or you are being facilitated by somebody. Just really use your best discernment around what's fact and what is being represented to you in terms of symbols and mythology. Our bodies are smarter than we can even comprehend, and they store information in really weird places. And that might be foreign to those of us in the West, but just ask billions of people who subscribe to Chinese medicine. You can also see someone who offers EFT, which is emotional freedom techniques or emotional release. Our good friend Dr. Pinkau. Sorry, Brian. He's based in Ottawa, and he is an amazing practitioner of emotional release. It takes no talking on your part, and he moves stuck energy out of your body with his voodoo. I don't know how it works. He's a chiropractor. It's very relaxing, very clearing. So yeah, try and check that out too if plant medicines aren't your thing. Okay, So let's move into the second layer of conflict, which are energy patterns and universal polarities. These patterns are created in your personal past, when you were in your infancy, perhaps during your gestational period. I love this conflict layer. These are energetic safety strategies for times where you felt scared or unsafe. So Kessler, oh my God, I'm just the worst with names today. Stephen Kessler, a psychotherapist, he brought all these energy patterns together from the works of other researchers in his book, The 5 Personality Patterns. I'm getting ahead of myself here. The 5 Personality Patterns is a great book. It's really simple to understand. And these patterns can be a really good source of understanding our suffering, because these old patterns of feeling and acting that helped us survive the traumas of childhood that get stuck in our bodies and shape how we are now, they are a thing. And he's really great at highlighting that these are just patterns. They're not personality types, which suggests that that's how you should identify, rather than seeing them as a form of behavior that can definitely be changed. And when I'm talking about traumas in your infancy, it can be as simple as observing your parents raising their voices at each other, or a dog barking, or the door slamming, just something that's shocking or scary to you. And as an infant, you can imagine there's very little that we can do about whatever scary thing is happening. You can't physically get up and leave or protect yourself. You can't ask people, hey, what was that? What just happened there? You can't ask for clarity or make it stop. So you have very little options. And so the only thing that we have the ability to do is shift the energy that's happening in our body. It's like the old adage, where you put your attention, your energy goes. So if something is upsetting you, you move your attention so it doesn't feel so bad. And so the way safety patterns are created is that first, you as this little helpless potato experience this overwhelm, right? Door slams. And you want it to stop. So you try out some 5 different safety strategies, and you see what works and you see what doesn't. And then if something does work, you're like, okay, that's successful. I'm just going to keep repeating that. And then as you grow up, that strategy becomes a habit, and then that pattern forms. And Kessler says that everyone usually does 2 of these patterns that I'm going to go through in a moment. Now, the reason why these patterns can be the source of your suffering today is when they're on autopilot. There are things that you do to feel safer when your ego is threatened or you're met with some kind of conflict. And it becomes this automatic habit and this self-reinforcing loop. So basically, you do it automatically when you're overwhelmed, and doing anything that you don't know you're doing when you're doing it will cause you a less than ideal experience. I think that's true in most instances. Like, we just want to know what we're doing, right? That's the definition of shadow work. So you should aim for being present rather than acting from a pattern that's from your past. By being present, you can deal with the situation more elegantly. You can deal with the situation in the way that your highest, most excellent self wants to deal with it. That's not to say that anger or shame isn't a welcome emotion. It's just, can we acknowledge those emotions as they're coming up and have a little distance from the immediate, rather than reverting to a past that we've had since we were babies? I'd also mention that they're self-perpetuating, and they can take on this life of their own. Our survival patterns shape our attention, right? So this means when you're in pattern, your reticular activating system lights up. And it lights up these details that reinforce your propensity for that pattern. For example, if you're in a pattern that focuses on emotional connection, it makes you more attentive to signs of attention or disapproval. So if you're in a fear pattern, it makes you more attentive to possible danger. And because our attention shapes our perception, and our perception shapes our experience of reality and our beliefs, all of this reinforces that, yes, being in my safety pattern all the time is good, because look at all the proof that I'm doing the right thing, right? Look at all the proof that people are abandoning me. Look at all the proof that my emotional connections are cut in half, are removed, are taken from me. So that's why this work, shadow work, is so important. It's like we can start to notice how our gears are continually perpetuating this sense of unpleasantness in our lives. Being oblivious to your safety pattern, you're not experiencing the world as fully as you might want to, as openly as you might want to, because you're so tuned into what your RAS, your reticular activating system, is allowing you to experience. If I said that a different way, people in different safety patterns experience different realities. So if you can get out of your pattern, you can experience a more complete reality rather than everything in that previous example. Everything is an emotional relationship on a verge of disaster. Sorry, that was kind of intense. You get what I mean. Okay, so I want to explain each of these safety strategies, but they're much easier to understand or to visualize with an image that I'm going to put into the description. Or maybe I'll figure out how to edit these videos and just like put it here or something. But this was taken from the 5 personality patterns, and you can click on the image if I can't figure out how to edit a video. All right, so first is the leaving pattern. This is where you send your energy somewhere else. I have this pattern. You abandon ship psychically, or you physically leave the situation. And I can say confidently, this is a pattern that I do when I'm sensing conflict. I do have a tendency to want to just get the hell out of here. It's a pattern associated with having weak energetic boundaries. So if you're a highly sensitive person, this might be a pattern that you struggle with. The second one is merging. So this is where you send your energy towards someone else to help you. It's like you're saying, this hurts, or I'm scared and I need you to help me because I can't help myself. I need someone to help fix this. Let me actually give an example of that first one. So I'm a little baby. I have no coping mechanisms and something scary is happening at me. And my strategy is just to put my consciousness somewhere else. If I can leave the situation and psychically go outside, that is the best way to deal with this. And I found that this works for me, right? For the merging person, maybe you cry a little bit, or your parent notices, or your caretaker notices that you are in distress, and they pick you up. And you notice, oh, every time I like do a little something, like cry a little bit or like go like this, they'll pick me up. And so the coping strategy is I need someone to help me. I can't do it myself. The third one is enduring. So this is when you move your energy in and you ground it into the earth. And Kessler said that this is the most common of people who have a strong will to do things their way, but they aren't allowed to, or they're just restricted by some authority figure. And so that's how like the strong silent type is born. This is the person who's passively this immovable object and is trying to hide their energy and bury it underground so people don't have to deal with it. Okay. Next we have the aggressive type. Now this is where you carry your energy up and outwards, directing it at another person. This pattern is also really common among people who have a strong will to do things their way, but instead of enduring the other person and repressively like grounding their energy, they found the benefit of blasting it outward and disorienting the person that's standing in their way. So with the baby example, I'm going to cry and scream, and my energy is so big that actually that made that stop. And that's a really interesting and helpful tactic, you know, but as an adult, you can see how that can be tricky to overpower somebody else's energy. I mean, they're all tricky, but some are, if you saw my other video, actually, I think I'm going to post it after this, on repressive and reactive manifestations of fear for beginners in shadow work. The people that have a pattern of expressing a more reactive style of shadow, we just have to send them lots of compassion, or compassion for yourself if that is you, because anger or aggression is a safety strategy, you know, and it doesn't make you any less good of a person than somebody who is in the leaving pattern. Now, it does affect other people, but so does everything. Repressing things affects people in ways that might not be so obvious. But anyway, just watch that video. I go more in depth in that. All right, and then the last one, the fifth one, is rigid, the rigid safety pattern. And this pattern is most common in people who have lived to perform to the standards of their parents or caregivers or authority figures. And this is when the body sets up this series of like energetic rings or currents in the body, so that by the time the energy is felt, it just hurts less. And it's called rigidity because the body actually tightens and your muscles contract so you don't feel as much emotion. In Kessler's book, he goes through these patterns in amazing detail, even what combinations of these patterns might look like for you. So if you're interested in this stuff, definitely get that book. It's called The 5 Personality Patterns, and I'll link to it into the description. I mean, talk about shadow work. It's like so crazy to think that we could be living in our 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 80s, and still be acting like we're these little babies. Now, what I wanted to focus on for the rest of this episode is what to do to get out of pattern, even though I really want to expand on all those patterns, but really the book will do a better job of doing that than I can explain here. Also, I don't know if that's legal for me to like go through an entire book. When you start doing any sort of like discovery or inner work, you first need to identify your inner witness. The inner witness doesn't judge, it doesn't comment on your experience. Its job is to record what you think, what you feel, what you say, what you do at the moment, so that you can go back and reflect on what you did to get from point A to point B. And if you listen to my podcast, you may have also heard me talk about pauses before. The inner witness activates during those moments of pauses after the pattern has occurred. So here's an example. Let's say you're happily remarried, and in a year, you just bought a new pair of shoes. You come home and you show your wife, and she's like, "Oh, wow, those look so nice on you. How much were they?" And you suddenly get this feeling of like storming off, you're annoyed, and you say, "What does it matter how much I paid for them? Why do you always have to ask me that?" And you find yourself just way more pissed off than you probably should be. Okay, what happened? How did you get from being super pleased about your new shoes to being the opposite of that, just like smoldering? Well, you can ask your inner witness to play back for you all those steps in between so you can see how you got from A to B. Maybe your inner dialogue was, "I know I probably don't need these shoes, but they're going to make training a lot better. Who am I kidding? I don't need the shoes. It's just my lack of willpower to go to the gym. That's why I'm not going." So that's a self-attack that you're experiencing. Maybe your inner voice was saying, "She'll probably point out that I already have a pair of shoes and I don't go to the gym anyway." And that's, attack on the other person. That's the reactive version of this shadow. Or it's like, "My first wife was so cheap and she kept me from doing anything that I wanted to do. And that got me out of shape in the first place. And now you're furious and you're just like lost in the past," right? So there's like a lot of different things that can pop up for you. At this point, this is very complex role playing. And then you're biting your head off, not distinguishing her from your first wife, right? If you haven't developed this inner witness, this practice, you might believe that the anger that you're feeling or the fear that you're feeling is caused by something outside of yourself. And you're going to look for evidence to support that belief. But if you have the ability to go back into your own experience during that pause, you can realize that what upset you, what angered you in the first place was from the past, and that the present situation only just reminded you of it. So now you know some important things. 1, you are still hurt and angry about the past situation. You are not being hurt right now by your current partner. You are caught in a reaction based on your past. The situation did not cause you to become upset. So your inner witness can help you learn something about yourself and come back to being more present in the here and now. Okay, so those are the first 2 layers of the 7 layers of conflict. I don't know if I'm going to go so in depth on all the other ones just because I think there was already a lot in here. As I'm getting used to YouTube, I'm finding that I need to cut down on some of my content. But do let me know. Do let me know if you want these episodes to be shorter. I can break them down into smaller segments. That would be really amazing, super helpful for me. So if you do have any feedback, in the comments is where that could go. Or you can find me on Instagram at Jessica Depatie _. That's DEPATIE _. And have a great week. Stay safe, but not too safe. And we'll talk again soon.